I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1689 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. Back in episode 1678 of this podcast, I featured a story about the Vietnam Symposium that was going to be held at Duke University on Wednesday night, March the 11th, 2020, at Duquesne University, right there in downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was very fortunate to be able to have Dr. Don Accamando, who just happens to have one of the coolest names in America. He came on and told us about this event that was going to occur. He explained how he was helping out, but it was started by another doctor, Bob Rodrigues, spelled with an S, because Dr. Rodrigues is of Portuguese heritage, not Latino. Latinos end that name with a Z. But not Dr. Bob Rodrigues, who is a wonderful individual who has done a lot for helping us all understand more about the Vietnam War. Matter of fact, I'm going to be talking more about Dr. Bob Rodrigues later. Just to give you a heads up, right now, he is scheduled to be on the next episode of this podcast to tell us about the class that he teaches about the Vietnam War right there at Duquesne University. I'm looking forward to it because he covers it from start to finish about what happened in Vietnam, how it happened, why it happened, and the results of it. He's going to come on this podcast and tell us in his own words all about it. It's going to be exciting, and I can hardly wait. In addition to that excitement, I have something else exciting to tell you. That symposium occurred just last night up there at Duquesne University, and already the school newspaper, the Duquesne Duke, has a story about it. I'm going to share that story with you because it is an excellent after-action report about what happened. Once you hear this, you might want to attend the next symposium they have next year. Bob Accamando tells me it's getting bigger every year. Once you hear this after-action report, you'll see why. And if you are anywhere in the eastern United States, you might want to go to it next year. And of course, I'll be letting you know all about when the next one will be taking place. The story I'm going to share with you today is titled, Duquesne Holds Its Third Annual Vietnam Symposium. The story was provided by Kellen Stepler. He is the features editor of the Duquesne Duke, the school newspaper up there. The byline of the paper is, Proudly Serving Our Campus Since 1925. This newspaper is not just a new kid on the block. They've been around for a while, pushing 100 years. Without any further ado, let's get into this after-action report about this Vietnam Symposium. Dateline, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A day doesn't go by that Jim Jenkins doesn't think about Vietnam. Jenkins, an Army helicopter captain and platoon leader during the 1971 invasion of Laos, said his most memorable event during his time in Vietnam was when 10 members of his platoon were killed in action during a 30-day period. I know exactly what he's talking about because I was there for the whole thing. Out there at Quai Son, I was flying a Cobra gunship with A Battery, 4th of the 77th Field Artillery, rocking and socking those opposing forces, while Jim Jenkins had to actually go fly into those hot LZs. You can see how hot it was. He lost 10 men from his platoon during Lam Sam 719. He was there talking about it. Continuing. It's that guilt of having led innocent men who had died in combat, Jenkins said. These symposiums have helped cure problems I've had, but it's been a challenge. Jenkins, along with 7 other Vietnam veterans, shared their stories Wednesday night in the Power Center Ballroom. The event was started by Duquesne adjunct professor and former high school teacher Robert Rodrigues, along with Garrett Cooper in 2011. It was sponsored by the Robert M. Rodrigues Fund and is co-sponsored with the Office for Military and Veteran Students and the McAnulty College of Liberal Arts History Department. Each year, the fund holds a public history talk and awards a scholarship to a Chartiers Valley High School senior, where Rodrigues taught for 48 years. I've spoken to Bob Rodrigues, and he does not sound like a person who's been teaching for over 50 years. He still sounds young and full of vim and vigor, which you're going to find out in the next episode. Back to the story. Kathy Swazuk, an Army nurse, noted the feeling of togetherness Vietnam soldiers had. If you had a hand and you could help, you were part of the team, Swazuk said. When I came home, I looked for that team and didn't find it. Curtis Marcus Simmons also noted that when they came back from the war, they were not welcomed back kindly. Swazuk also mentioned hearing some American music while serving in Vietnam made some of the soldiers feel conflicted. We knew how unpopular the war was at home, but we were proud of what we were doing to help our soldiers, Swazuk said. We were conflicted. The panel also reflected on the Kent State shooting in protest of the war. It was kids shooting kids, Greg Conley, a Vietnam Marine, said. Jenkins said he thought part of the riots were due to the draft. In 1969, the U.S. Selective Service System conducted lotteries to determine the order of call to military. The U.S. Selective Service System conducted lotteries to determine the order of call to military service in the Vietnam War. Kids had to take a position on the war. We had skin in the race, Jenkins said. You had to be involved because of the draft. Simmons also noted the lessons he learned when he came home from the war. Vietnam did not play fair, Simmons said. Between Jenkins, panelist Al Robinson, and me, we had 10 lives. Al's been married 4 times, me 3 times, and Jenkins 2. When Al and I returned home, we self-medicated with marijuana, alcohol, and women. It was difficult to come home and hug my children after taking other children's lives. Simmons noted that talking out his experiences during the war has helped him cope. This process has been one of the most therapeutic things for me, Simmons said. I have 4 siblings, but Al is my real brother. We've known each other for 55 plus years, and we never talk about Vietnam. Thanks to Bob Rodrigues, I can process some of my stuff. Vietnam Marine George Haught served in the Battle of Hue during the Tet Offensive in February 1968. Rodrigues said that the Tet Offensive was the turning point of the Vietnam War, as the Viet Cong attacked cities in South Vietnam. During the Tet Offensive, journalist Walter Cronkite told American viewers at home that there was no way the Americans could win the war, changing how Americans perceived the war. Pardon me, I really hated to hear when Walter Cronkite got back home and said the war was lost, because when he was still in Vietnam reporting on it, and I just happened to be there at the time, not next to Walter Cronkite, but I heard him say that the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong suffered a terrible defeat in the Tet Offensive, and it would take them a long time to get over it. Yet, when he came home, and more than likely the suits up there in the CBS headquarters building in New York said, "You better not say that about the NVA getting their butts kicked in the Tet Offensive. You better say that we lost it." And I don't like defeatists. Pardon me. Let's get back to the story. Enough of my own personal stuff. Halt, who hadn't talked about Vietnam until 5 years ago, stood and recalled his experiences going into the city of Hue and the fire upon fire there. "We all thought we were going to die," Halt said. "It was just a shooting gallery." Concluding the Battle of Hue, 218 U.S. troops were dead and 1,364 were wounded. "For a 19-year-old, it was really something," Halt said, as the audience clapped. At the end of the 2-hour panel, Tony Accamando, Vietnam veteran, Duquesne graduate, and co-founder of Veterans Cable Services and Friends of Da Nang, presented the panelists with a Vietnam print that said, "No man left behind," as a way to say welcome home. Tony's brother Don is the director of the Office of Military and Veteran Students at Duquesne. He discussed the importance of taking in stories like this. Don was the person who talked about this symposium back in episode 1678. He also said this: "Classroom learning is one aspect, but hearing accounts of our neighbors reminding us of the war is another." There you have it, the after-action report of the 3rd Annual Vietnam Symposium held at Duquesne University. I'd like to thank Bob Rodrigues and Don Accamando for helping make this event a reality. It's doing a lot of good for many Vietnam veterans and for a lot of people who are not that familiar with the war. We need to do these things not only to help the veterans, but also help the American people understand what happened there and do our best to have leaders run this country who don't step in the same rabbit holes that they did back in the 1960s to get us involved in such a thing like the Vietnam War. Let's hope this country has leaders wise enough to see the errors of the past and not repeat them in the future. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1689 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?